Hello, ladies and gentlemen, it is Kevin with Optimized Essentials, and in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you how to build your willpower and even self-discipline with the types of foods that you are eating. Now, in this video, I'm actually going to be sharing with you more of the informative aspect, the information behind why food affects your willpower and self-discipline, as opposed to the specific foods that you should be eating. If you want to know the specific foods that you want to be eating, I'm going to be creating another video on that titled The Best Foods That Will Boost Your Willpower. So make sure you keep an eye out for that when it's released. But in this video, as I mentioned, I'm going to be sharing with you the mechanisms behind how to build your willpower with food, because a lot of times we struggle to discipline ourselves or exert our willpower to eat the right foods. So it's literally kind of flipping the switch, right? Eat certain types of foods to build your willpower. What a paradox, right? That should be your motivation. If you're having trouble using your willpower, exerting your willpower to eat certain types of foods, how about using the motivation of certain foods will help you build more self-discipline? Now, why is this the case? I'm going to be sharing with you all of that in today's video, and I'm going to be reading a lot of things to you, so I recommend if something comes up, take some notes, because a lot of this information is going to be mind-blowing, okay? So first and foremost, the very first thing we have to understand when it comes down to willpower, self-discipline, self-control is that, yes, there is somewhat a finite amount of willpower we have, meaning the muscle that we utilize when it comes down to exerting our willpower, prefrontal cortex. If it's not developed enough, even if we have a lot of blood sugar, it doesn't always mean we'll make the right choice. But at the same time, the brain operates on glucose, okay? Glucose, in other words, sugar, is the fuel, the preferred fuel source that your brain uses to operate and to perform and to make decisions. Every time there is a mental operation, there is a process, right? Your mental process is going on. When there is some decisions to be made, your brain utilizes some glucose. So the very first thing you want to understand is this. I'm going to read this to you, okay? Acts of self-control deplete relatively large amounts of glucose. Self-control failures are more likely when glucose is low or cannot be mobilized effectively to the brain, i.e. when insulin is low or insensitive. Restoring glucose to a sufficient level typically improves self-control. Numerous self-control behaviors fit this pattern, including controlling attention, regulating emotions, quitting smoking, coping with stress, resisting impulsivity, and refraining from criminal and aggressive behavior. Alcohol reduces glucose throughout the brain and body and likewise impairs many forms of self-control. Furthermore, self-control failure is most likely during times of the day when glucose is used least effectively. Self-control thus appears highly susceptible to glucose. Self-control benefits numerous social and interpersonal processes. All right, glucose might therefore be related to a broad range of social behavior. Now, there's a few distinctions, few key understandings and discernments that I want to make very, very, very clear. Number one, it's that not all glucose is created the same, meaning if you're eating refined sugars and a lot of white table sugar, meaning white devil, any of the processed grains, refined grains, and pretty much the things you find in muffins, cereals, high glycemic things, all of this has been shown to have a very harsh effect on your body, meaning it could increase inflammation, it could spike your insulin levels, spike your blood sugar levels, cause your system to go chaotic simply because it's heavily processed and your body doesn't like this fuel source. It's basically an imitation glucose, and your brain and body is like, WTF, I cannot function properly with this fuel source. So you'll have hyperactive moods, you'll have very chaotic moods, you'll have mood swings because your energy levels are unstable, okay? So that's the first thing I want to differentiate. And also, the second thing is, just because you have sugar inside of your body, it does not necessarily mean you automatically have more willpower, right? Glucose is one of the fuel sources, one of the fuel sources, but there's a wide range of nutrients that your brain and your body utilizes to support maximum function of the brain and the body and the other processes of the body, okay? And then number 3, the last distinction I want to make is, have you ever noticed towards the end of the day, right, when you are literally depleted, you have a tendency to either 1, be more emotional, 2, make worse decisions, and 3, overall feel more shitty, because simply you're either tapped out in your prefrontal cortex, or your brain and your body is physically exhausted. Your brain is exhausted because it's not getting the quality fuel and nutrition that it needs, all right? So there's no reservoirs to tap into. And even if there are reservoirs to tap into, the blood sugar or the fuel inside of your body is simply low quality. Think about it this way. When you have a nice car, you want to pump it with the highest quality premium fuel. But what happens when you pump it with low quality fuel, right? Instead of getting 91, you get 87. What ends up happening is maybe over time, the engine starts to break down simply because the fuel is not supported by this car. The same thing applies, okay? So there was some studies done where, kids were fed different types of food for breakfast, and it seemed as though that the kids who were given foods with low GI foods, meaning the foods weren't that rapidly absorbed and it was like a delayed release, meaning they ate foods that, had a longer release in their system, they performed better cognitively in terms of memory and attention. And then kids who were given high GI foods, meaning they spiked their blood sugar really quick, they became more hyperactive, they had trouble focusing, they had initial burst of energy, but quickly that energy started to dissipate and then it became chaotic. And then finally the kids who had no food, they were extremely, potentially irritable, or they had issues with focus, they had issues with memory, they simply weren't interested, they couldn't pay attention because their brain didn't have the nutrients and resources it needs. So they couldn't really exert their willpower, okay? Now, what about people who are intermittent fasting, right? They're like, oh, I'm doing intermittent fasting. What about that? Does that mean my willpower is impacted? Potentially. My experience with intermittent fasting is there are some days where my brain is working fine with intermittent fasting, meaning, maybe my body is tapping into the stored blood sugar or the stored glucose in my body. But at other times when I'm depleted, meaning if I'm working out or there is certain, tasks that require a lot of willpower and I'm tapped out because I either worked out really hard the night before, then what ends up happening is I find myself more sluggish, more slow, more hungry really quickly, because that requires a high cognitive demand and my body is really depleted, so my brain can't function and it needs glucose. So it really depends on your adaptability. Maybe you've been adapted to burning your fat as your fuel. It really depends. How does it feel for you when you do intermittent fasting? Are you slow, sluggish, or clear-minded? If you're clear-minded, you're fine. But if you're slow, sluggish, more stupid, and you feel like you operate better if you have some breakfast, then you have not adapted to intermittent fasting, or your body doesn't like skipping breakfast, or you are malnourished, so your body can't do its job without food, okay? So that's what I want to cover. And then another thing is, similar to what I mentioned about glucose, is your insulin, right? People who have insulin sensitivity, they can't channel the glucose into their blood. And a lot of this happens to people who are eating foods that is foreign to the body, meaning heavily processed foods, heavily refined grains, heavily GMO foods, foods that are way high in sugar that your body just doesn't want to shuffle into its cells. So what ends up doing, it begins to circulate into your joints, begin to circulate into, it gets stored as your fat cells, and it basically just clogs and messes up your system. And, when you don't eat the right foods, I'm sure you'll notice that it makes you sleepy, right? Have you noticed when you eat something, you're just like, oh, especially fried foods. If you eat fried foods, your body has to work very hard. It has to put a lot of energy to metabolize and assimilate the dead food that is often GMO'd, often filled with carbs that inflame your gut, often filled with trans fats or hydrogenated oils or vegetable oils like rapeseed oil or palm oil or canola oil, sunflower oil. All these oils may seem healthy, but they're really not. They're highly processed, and even if they aren't, at higher smoke points, they cause the oils to be no bueno, right? Your body, when you ingest these oils, cause your gut to be all out of whack. It causes your digestion to be all out of whack. It literally bloats you and causes you to be constipated, and everything gets shunt from your blood. Everything like in your brain gets like shunt to your body. And if you know anything about the brain and gut connection, whatever happens to your gut will affect your mood, because serotonin, which is produced mainly in the gut, is a mood regulator. It is a sleep regulator, meaning if your gut is messed up, you're not going to produce enough serotonin. If you don't produce enough serotonin, your mood is going to be funky. You're going to feel down and depressed and sad, and your brain isn't going to get its nutrients because your gut isn't working. Think about the gut, right? Watch this. Think about the gut as the root. This is your brain up here, your upper centers, the root of your body. When that is not functioning properly, meaning you're not absorbing the nutrients to assimilate into your brain, right? Your brain won't work. Your brain has certain prerequisites, certain micronutrients, certain fatty acids that it needs. Let me read you this list of micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals, and I want you to see if you have heard of any. And I want you to look up the powerful effects of them, right? Phytonutrients, flavonoids like carotenoids, beta-carotene, chlorophyll, EFA, right? Essential fatty acids, DHA, EPA, alpha-linoleic acid, ALA, CLA, conjugate linoleic acid, something like that, resveratrol, polyphenols, right? All of these are powerful antioxidants that help with your cells when they oxidize, right? There's metabolic waste, there's cellular reactions going on in your body at all times, and the more of this waste you have going on from a bunch of the shit you eat and you're not processing and eliminating it correctly, you become a toxic sludge. And when your body is highly acidic, or it's not alkalinized, or it doesn't have the micronutrients or vitamins and minerals on board to clean up, what ends up happening is that taxes your body, and that causes your brain, right, to not have the adequate resources on board, also known as glucose and, other micronutrients, other minerals, other brain boosting powers that, the other nutrients that I mentioned have, to make the decisions necessary to move your life forward. So when you are nutrient deprived, not only does that mess your body up, but it messes your brain up, because sometimes it could cross the blood-brain axis or the blood-brain barrier and inflame your brain, right? You can get brain inflammation. And if that doesn't scare you enough, when you go to sleep, your body can't effectively repair itself. Your brain can't effectively recover during the day, because there simply isn't that type of nutrient on board to do its job. So you're getting lower quality sleep, which leads to sleep deprivation. And what happens when you get sleep deprived? You make lower quality decisions because your willpower is low. You're not fully recharged, okay? And then not only that, right? There's often GMOs, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides that are sprayed into the crops or sprayed into the vegetables, if you're not getting organics, that are used and fed to the animals. So that causes gut permeability. And when you have gut permeability, that leads to chaotic moods, autoimmunity, gastrointestinal issues, mood issues, stress response. And when all of this happens, basically, your mood is pretty much messed up, okay? Certain foods will help produce serotonin. Certain foods will produce endorphins. Have you heard of adaptogens? Adaptogens is basically a fancy word to say that these foods help in dealing with stress. So when you don't have the adequate nutrition on board, when your brain isn't getting the vitamins and minerals that it needs to build the neurotransmitters to support your mood, and your cells are not operating properly, your body is stressed, your brain is stressed, now you are in a heavily depleted position to make decisions. That is why your willpower is low, okay? So I hope I hammered this in good enough. I didn't share with you what foods to eat, but in the next video, I will do just that. So make sure you keep an eye out. Watch the best brain boosting foods in the next video. Have a good one. Peace.